Welcome to Roadmap. Today's podcast. Today's podcast is: do all products at Auto Trader have a UI? And with me today, I've got two big hitters. Well, they're at least taller than me. Do you want to introduce yourselves? First up, Del. So, what do you look after, Del, and who you are?
Yeah, so I am the product lead for our API platform, which is called Auto Trader Connect, and fundamentally that API platform is all about trying to expose more of our data to the automotive industry and provide capabilities to allow people to connect to different parts of our marketplace, ultimately so we can help the industry make better decisions and create better connected experiences.
Awesome. And what about yourself, Pete?
I look after pretty much most things we do, which is kind of data related. So everything from valuations to like marketplace metrics, any kind of insight that we can provide to retailers to help them make better decisions. So whether that's sourcing, pricing, making decisions around stocking policies, things like that, then that's typically my area. Provenance as well. Vehicle history checks, that kind of thing.
Cool. So it's pretty interesting because obviously you two are starting to work more and more together as we build out the platform, and obviously data becomes more important. So how do you feel like this differs in terms of like when you look at colleagues that are working maybe on the autotrader.co.uk, you know, how do you two, the synergies you bring together, and what differences do you find working together than you do from with colleagues working on maybe consumer facing apps?
Do you want to kick off?
Yeah, I can take this one. So there's definitely a difference just in terms of this has been kind of a transition for myself over the last kind of 4 or 5 years, where it's been a shift more towards a broader focus on purely around the data and what our data capability is. Prior to that, I did work more on, even though there was data within those products, it was very much what you might think of as more traditional kind of product development and products that you might make, as you say, for consumers, for retailers. And there's big differences just in terms of how you need to kind of conceptualize things, and it's a bit of a learning curve to kind of divorce yourself away from a little bit in terms of the experience for the end user, because that's outside of your immediate control when you start moving more into the kind of the data platform type area. So there's definitely a difference in terms of less interaction with design colleagues, for example, and you're working more with engineers, but it's a different type of engineering as well. It's a lot of data science, a lot of data analysis and stuff that goes on. So it's different people that you're working with, people with different skill sets than what you might be used to on kind of the more traditional kind of product development type projects. Yeah,
and what about yourself, Dal?
I'd probably share a lot of similarities with that when we're thinking about like the API products that we're creating and fundamentally just the API capabilities that we're trying to build. It really is about trying to conceptualize the experience for the product users, and those product users are kind of third-party developers, people who are outside of our organization who are trying to build their own tools, their own services, their own products, but leveraging our platform. So it's, again, one step removed from the end user, but the user you're building for is a developer. So similar to Pete, it's a lot less time spent with, or no time spent with really any kind of designers, because the user experience is a different type of user experience when you're thinking about developers. And like the themes of things that I'm focused on is, how do I build APIs with our engineers that focus on flexibility, focus on kind of this intuitive kind of commonality across different APIs. So it's easy for somebody to know when I'm looking at one or many of your services, I understand kind of automatically without really having to spend a huge amount of time what I'm supposed to do with them. And then probably the third thing is really starting to think about like the ease of implementation. So how well can somebody kind of go from nothing to kind of hello world, I've built a new application on top of your platform. And obviously that's one of the things we're trying to build and get better and better and better at, which is can we start to provide more and more tools alongside the kind of the core capability, because that's like the foundation of, we want to provide like a capability to connect to our platform or to connect to other applications within the industry, or to consume insights that Pete's producing in his world. But alongside that, it's all about that developer user experience to make our platform as easy to work with as possible. And I think those are the big immediate differences. And you might just turn around and say, well, within API products or within our platform, there's no real user design, or there's no UX design experience or anything like that. But there actually is. You've got to focus on a different type of user experience for that type of product.
Yeah. And how did you both get into this area? Because obviously we've been speaking to other product managers around the business as part of the Roadmap podcast, but this is very distinct areas that you two work in. So how did you find yourself in this place?
Do you want me to take it first?
Yeah, you go for it.
So I think I mentioned in my response to the last question that I started off working on what you would consider more traditional type products, but I did a few years working on products that were aimed at our retailer customers.
Yeah.
So retailers looking to source and sell cars to consumers, and I worked in that space for a good couple of years. And then one of the big projects that I worked on was products called Retail Check and Retail Accelerator. And they're very data-heavy products.
Right.
They help retailers to make sure they're sourcing the right cars, pricing them well, helping them sell them faster, understanding how they can manage margin, all of that type of good stuff. And that was kind of a natural doorway then into, as we shifted as Auto Trader as well, in terms of moving away from just purely building software products. And actually, we've got all of this data capability for some of our customer base. It's our software tools aren't there kind of the most convenient access route for them to this data. They may have their own development teams. They build their own products. Yeah. They've got their own tools that they use internally. But we don't want to kind of exclude them from all of the kind of great data and insight and things that we were working on. So as we started to make that shift internally within Auto Trader to say it's less about necessarily always using the software tools that we build, we can enable capabilities that you can take advantage of within your own products. So that was kind of a natural shift alongside as Auto Trader shifted, my career kind of shifted with it, so that I moved out of just purely working on data and insight tools as in software, and actually more into just what our data capability is as Auto Trader, and whether you choose to access that through an API or you choose to use it within a software tool that we build. I was kind of became involved in kind of both of those worlds.
And is that where you then sort of joined this party as well, Del, or were you already working in the platform space?
I think in terms of, there's a very clear intersection between like what I work on and kind of what Pete's responsible for. I think my journey was probably maybe like 5-6 years back, maybe even longer than that. Before we even had any kind of notion of a platform capability, and to Pete's point, we were kind of focused on building tools within our own kind of walled garden. So everything that we had was tools that we built that we wanted to ask retailers to come and use our stuff. We almost kind of wanted to own the dealer desktop that we used to describe that way. But like my journey kind of kicked off when we almost like were pivoting away from wanting to build lots of different dealer websites that we had. We had a whole brand that was focused on kind of building dealer websites and other kind of search marketing things that we used to do like way back. And I think it was probably 2016 when our CTO was kind of exploring if we were to build an API gateway and we were to almost expose one of our core capabilities, which was our search platform, which underpins the core search experience for Auto Trader. Would people go and build on top of that to create their own online experiences that then almost pivots away from the dealer website, the SaaS type dealer website products that we used to build? And we explored that, we experimented with it. We knew there was some uptake from certain retailers who wanted to run towards, I can have the best of both worlds. I can leverage your capability, but I can build what I want.
Yeah.
And that removes the onus from us of having to maintain lots and lots of bespoke things, which we just didn't really want to do. So that was kind of the first foray, and that kind of goes to Pete's point about there is more of a recognition, or starting to be a recognition, that there's ways in which we can reduce friction in how retailers operate, in almost providing a pathway or a platform for them to kind of leverage what they already do and what they already use and tools they already have, but still utilizing what's kind of unique and kind of core to us. So I think that was like the first foray into building API platforms, was our search service. And we just extended from there to almost kind of just adding more and more and more and exposing more and more capabilities to help retailers ultimately manage their forecourt, build kind of their own online search experiences, their own websites and whatnot. But I think from the forecourt management side of things, that's where the intersection starts to come in with Pete's World, because in that period where we're saying we want to just allow retailers to have the flexibility of use our tools or use your own tools, we give you the means of accessing our data wherever you is most convenient. That really kind of runs towards that drive of we want to expose our data to make people, or to enable people to make better decisions, but ultimately we want to try and remove the friction of how customers operate, because if we can reduce that barrier, we can reduce the overhead of completing task A, B, and C. Yeah, is all the better for the industry.
And moving that way, is there any like new risks or new opportunities that spring to mind that you've had to start to like double down on focusing on particular areas, or has it been a smooth path, especially with yourself, Pete, moving away from developing a portal UI and creating a service instead?
I mean, there's definitely there's both. Yeah, there's opportunities and risks, and it's something that over the years we've talked about quite a lot, and it hasn't necessarily been a clear path of like, okay, we're just doing everything through APIs. Yeah, and it's been a bit of a balancing act really, because what we're trying to do is, we've almost come from a software first approach where we had our own software tools. They were established. They're in the market. There's tons of customers using them. But as Del was just saying there, we had this. There was always that friction there for some customers. For some customers, it's great. It's really convenient using Auto Trader software tools. It's where they want it. It's where they spend most of their day. That's absolutely fine. But there was always a pocket of customers, and it was a significant number where it's like, I'm already logging into 10 systems a day to do all the tasks that I need to do. I'm trying to, run a car dealership, bike dealership, whatever it may be. And, you're just adding another point of friction into my day. I get the value in what you're delivering. I really want access to it, but I want access to it over here just because it makes it quicker and easier for me. And I'm already in there, in whatever system it might be, doing these other jobs, so it just makes sense. It's more convenient and so on. But we had to. That was a challenging transition for us, because we'd gone from having full control effectively over the user experience. We're going all the way from say we're developing a new metric. It's something that we think can really help users. It might be how fast we think a car is going to sell, for example, from a specific location. That's one of the kinds of metrics that we do. In the old world, we would build that metric and we would spend loads of time trying to understand, right, okay, what's the right way to present it so that users know how to use it, they understand it, they can make better decisions off of it and use the information in the right way. And when you make that bit of a pivot to say, actually, we're not going to make you come into our domain to actually access this information, we're going to make it broadly available to you so you can access it wherever you like, you give up some of that control, and that does introduce risks, because at the end of the day, it's still our name against that whatever data and insight it is that's being consumed by the end user. But there's now another layer potentially. It could be a middleware provider who offers, actually runs the software that the end user is using, and if they don't present the information in the right way, or they may be utilizing a way that we wouldn't advise, then ultimately the customer is still a reflection on Auto Trader. So that's where it's been a bit of a risk in terms of just giving up some of that control. Whenever you give up a little bit of control, it's always a little bit nerve-wracking. So that's definitely been a risk. But the opportunity has been, on the flip side to that, has been, the opportunity to reach more customers, have our, the really cool kind of data and insight that we can build that we genuinely believe can really help retailers. being able, the opportunities to be able to give that to them in a really convenient way, where they're going to use it and it's going to become more of their day-to-day. So it's kind of, for me anyway, they've been kind of the biggest kind of risks.
And I totally agree with that. And I think from the risk side, it's almost, you go from the way you described it, full control. And I think even in the earlier days, and probably it's something we're still working through now, where you transition to the flip side of, well, completely democratize all control of like how people use it. But then I think we're trying to find that happy medium and work towards a way of, you expose it, but how do we start to put the relevant, I wouldn't say guardrails, but like guidance frameworks in place where when it's utilized how we expect it to be utilized. And that's just a balance and act. And I think something that's going to be an ever evolving piece. And I think the one other bits of control, which is like the layers in between you and the end user, because obviously we're talking about, you might have one intermediary, but it could be many layers of intermediaries. I already know of a scenario where we've got our data going to one platform, who's then exposing to another platform, who's then exposing to another end user. So it can it can cascade through many layers, particularly as what we're doing now in terms of building like platform level APIs. Lots of other businesses are trying to do the same thing. The theme generally is about how do you create better connectivity within our industry and all industries, because everybody's trying to drive out cost of lots of systems and lots of processes and inefficiency in how people do what they need to do. So I think that's part of the risk. But then again, the double-edged sword is the opportunity that comes from that. And I think as well as reaching more of our traditional customers, I think it's reaching new customers. I think when we start to talk about or consider the segments that we are almost like branching into without really having to go heavyweight, trying to spend loads of time and resource to go and break down doors like insurance, in finance and whatnot. We've got lots of ways in which we're exposing our capabilities in those segments from things that we've already built for retail. And that's part of the beauty of, for me, for APIs, that it provides that level of flexibility that you're solving for one problem, but that same capability can be utilized in lots of novel ways in lots of different areas. And I think that's the other part of the opportunity, is the innovation. And we've been talking about that recently, that as people want to start to do maybe some things that we hadn't considered with our own data and our insights, you might say, oh, actually, that's a really cool idea. That might be something that we want to borrow.
And have we got to a point where with some of our product set where we're thinking API first, or is it still we have the UI and then we think about what the external API could be?
Yeah, I mean, we've definitely we launched some new capability in our valuations last year, and that went API first. So that was available through our APIs before it was available within our own software. And there was a few reasons why we took that decision, but one of them was because we know, once we make something available externally, there's then those external parties who need to take advantage of that. So there's like a bit of a runway time where they need to understand what the data is. Work with whatever guidance we provide as Dell says. That's something we're doing more and more of, where we're giving that guidance on, this is how to get the most out of this new capability or this new data that we've made available. And so by the time that they've done that and then we've built it into our own software, you're almost hitting the market at the same time, effectively. But it was that's an example of where things have been available in the API first. And I think it goes into the way that we are starting to approach things as well. Whenever we're talking about developing new products or new capabilities, we're always thinking now as like, okay, and how would this be exposed externally for somebody else to take advantage of? And that's happening earlier and earlier in our thinking. So it's definitely been a shift.
And is that where you two now? I'm not going to let you say like Morecambe and Wise or any sort of crazy double act, but is this where you like more and more you seem to be working together? Is it because of that we're getting parity in terms of thinking about the API so much earlier in the sort of the conceptual side of thinking what new products or data attributes we might be?
I think by the nature of our two domains that there is almost, like we described at the outset, we're both a little bit one step removed from the end user, but have to consider all those same types of problems about what might that experience look like, both in our tools and in external tools. And I think the power of our data is becoming more and more of like a key currency for us as a business, that it absolutely feels like it's the cornerstone of why we're overlapping so much. I mean, we described like this is almost this intersection between me in my area kind of focusing across all the different APIs across lots of different domains, whether it be our data and insights or our stock system or our vehicle data system or what we're now building around digital retailing and almost that kind of that omni-channel experience. That's the span and the horizontal view of all of the capabilities we have as a business that we want to externalize. And Pete's like really kind of focused on the data side, and I think that intersection really is like super complementary for us. Don't know whether you agree.
Yeah, I think so. I rely on Dell a lot for understanding how something that I'm working on, something that I'm looking to do and achieve through the APIs, is how that might fit with other, all the other parts of AutoTrader who might also be looking to. So Dell almost acts as like the I don't want to call you the gatekeeper, but he's got that view of everything that's happening broadly across the API and can think about that API design and what somebody's looking to do over here and what I'm looking to do, and how they might fit together. So we're not going off in loads of different directions, and ultimately it comes back to like as Del was saying, we've got external developers who are almost our customers and end users. So he's thinking around, okay, how might we bring these various elements together to make it as simple, easy to use, so that it's as easy to work with as possible. And that's not necessarily something that I would have a great view of, because I'm very focused on whatever the priorities are that I'm looking to achieve with. So it's almost like I've got like a really kind of deep view on something that might be happening at a given point in time. And Dell's got that broader overview, so I can go to him and say, this is what we're looking to do, this is what we're looking to achieve, this is how we want to make it available to customers, this is how they can benefit from it. And then I can work with Dell to kind of figure out, okay, what might that look like, how might that fit with everything else that we've got going on.
Yeah. And how does it all fit together in terms of we talked about it's different skill sets in a certain way, and your career journeys have been different and have branched out. So how do you then play this back into the rest of the sort of the product and tech community, so that there's a broader awareness of it?
I think it's, with anything, there is obviously that creeping towards a way of working, and I think the direction of travel for the business in terms of like strategic priorities, there's definitely a heavy focus on our data and insights and our platform as key enablers for meeting all of our broad business goals. So I think with that in mind, there is naturally going to be a shift in terms of all of our product colleagues in the way we have to appreciate and think about not just the tools that are delivered through, or our data and our capabilities delivered through our own tools and our own specific products, but what does that experience mean and look like for other third-party tools and applications and whatnot? Because as we're trying to build that overarching, better connected automotive ecosystem, that's a consideration that everybody will have to start factoring in. And I think that's already happening, like Pete described, that much earlier on, conceptualizing this is what it means for our tools, but this is what it also might mean for third parties. And again, not everybody's going to be or need to have the same level of expertise or probably depth that Pete has from a data perspective, or I have in our APIs. But I think broadly, if people are more kind of cognizant of this is what our data means and this is what our platform needs to think about, just broadly, I think that is what would help, and I think it's already happening.
Yeah, I was just gonna add to that. There's almost like there's two there's kind of two approaches that we've kind of taken to date. One has been around an awareness piece, and making sure the other product leads across the business are aware that APIs are available, and actually that they know they can take advantage of it, because it could help them solve some problems.
So we mean to use them as internal services, that type of stuff, do you mean? Or
and they might have particular product challenges. They might be having some of that friction with the end user, and it's like the API could play a part here in helping you solve that. So it's making sure that they're aware it's there, and there is the opportunity for them to take advantage of it. And the other has almost been like playing a bit of a consultancy type role. So I might not be leading on a particular product. That might be another product lead within AutoTrader, but they might come to me or to Dell to say, this is what we're thinking about doing. This is the product concept. We know we need to think about API, but we're not quite sure what we need to think about with the API. And then you can give that, as Dell says, they don't need that to have that deep level of knowledge of how everything within the APIs and data space might be working. But we can give them enough that they can and help support them so that they can make sure that that's not forgotten about and doesn't become an issue down the road. Yeah. So I'd say that there's definitely the awareness thing up front of making sure everybody knows it's there, and then the other part to it is it's just being on hand to offer that support. Yeah,
and Pete, you've talked a lot about retailers, but from Dell, from your perspective, what kind of third parties or people do you work with outside of AutoTrader? The particular, like you mentioned, insurance companies. What kind of other technology providers you work with?
Well, at the moment, it's primarily going to be third-party providers for retailers. That's the vast majority of the people who are integrated to our services. But like I said before, it extends to other segments. So we've got a bunch of insurers that integrate our data, our wonderful data that Pete curates, into all sorts of processes, primarily claims. There's one example where our valuations, our provenance data, our vehicle identification data, access to our search service to find evidence helps with the total loss claims process. So they can just have one source of well-trusted, accurate information that has just rapidly improved the speed at which an insurer can complete their claims process, underpinned by an accurate evaluation that's derived from our marketplace with additional evidence of these other comparative vehicles for a consumer to replace. And all of that is kind of a simple set of APIs that we've already built, that was built primarily for retailer third parties, but leveraged by insurers, and drastically reduce the overhead that a given insurer has to kind of have in place in terms of process and people to deliver that experience.
And how much do you get involved with the actual tech implementations, like the third party? Does you get involved with the third party dev teams, or is it very much hand over, here's the documentation, here's the portal, the guidance?
So rolling back a few years, I was a lot more involved, a lot more hands-on in terms of the implementation, because one, we had fewer APIs and we had a lower volume of third-party integrations or integrators. So there was, while it was newer, there was definitely a need for me to kind of get closer to how people were using our services. But as time's gone on, we've kind of broadened the span of our services. We've kind of built a team that is there to support our technical account management team, there to support partners, integrate our services, and I kind of take a step back from the implementation itself, but I still have a view of how well are developers able to integrate our services, and I think that's kind of a bit of a litmus test for me in terms of how well we're executing that. And I'm not going to lie, there's always ways in which we can improve and additional tools we can build and processes we can streamline to make that journey from first seeing this is what our APIs are to almost building an actual production tool.
Yeah.
So for me, that's a huge area of opportunity for us. But personally, I've stepped back a little bit.
Okay, I'm just thinking, because you talked both about your getting quite specialist and into specialist domains. What about the tech guys you work with? Are they in this specialist domain as well, or is it something that we have specialist teams that are double down on this, or is it people moving in and out working on them?
Do you want to take it?
It's a tough one. It's a tough question to answer because it can vary. When we get into some of our more kind of data science heavy type stuff, a lot of the really complex stuff, then you're absolutely talking about specialist people. Yeah. People have been brought in to help us, deliver that kind of capability. Sometimes where it's taking something which is a bit more mature, it's something that we've had maybe for a while and we're looking to repurpose it, use it in a different way, maybe add it into an existing product. That can sometimes be a little bit of just bringing people in and upskilling them, and also taking advantage of the skills that they've got. So, for example, if we're looking to repurpose some existing data and insight into an existing product, if you've got people who already work on that product, already understand it really well, understand the code base.
Yeah.
We've actually been trialing. We did this for the first time, I think it was about January 2022, and we saw an opportunity to say, we've got, rather than just kind of have what we typically call the more kind of back-end development happen, and then pass that over to the product team, why don't we actually take people from each of the teams and bring them together?
Yeah.
And we did that on a project that ran for about 5 months. It was about a 5-month project, and that we got some really good feedback of that. And what we actually found is there was like our back end kind of people, they upskilled in terms of their ability to work with some of our UI frameworks and things like that, and vice versa. So there was just I think the people who took part in that project got a better appreciation of the skill sets that others have, off the back of that, actually, one of our developers who was more in the kind of data science world really enjoyed the more front end UI focused work, and has now made that shift permanently and moved over. So, it's giving people broader opportunities.
Yeah. The reason I ask is because just like this is going back in the day, back in the 90s. Where I used to work, like, there wasn't APIs, it was like EDI, like data transfers, but we had a specialist team, which was great because I was in it, but actually it became really frustrating because you never got to see any of the stuff the user interface type builds, and likewise they'd never come into our world, so you became very distinct work streams that never really collaborated. So like Del, on the sort of more the API development, is that something that is broadly lots of dev teams are getting involved with on the external side, or is it more they're building the internal services and then externally we've got a team that are looking at how they expose that out?
Yeah, I think that is just generally the pattern, because obviously we've got like a very focused and clearly articulated microservice kind of architecture within our business anyway. So like building APIs, internal APIs, is just a common practice for us and has been for a while. And I think that hasn't changed. I think the focus in terms of creating those external services has definitely been concentrated in one group. But like to Pete's point, it's back-end developers, but I think even from inception, it's been the same group that's always been thinking about external APIs. And I think that because of maybe that legacy of always having that mindset, it just made sense just to say, well, let's just kind of keep it with that group. But fundamentally, it's the same set of principles, whether it's internal or external APIs. So I don't think it would matter. Yeah. I think just for simplicity.
And do you feel like the pair of you, again, it's more like going from my experience, whereas I think I'm sort of an honorary member, very loosely connected to engineering, because once in the day I coded in Powerhouse, which is like, again, in 1997. So how close do you feel like to the engineering community? Because obviously your products are very technical.
Ooh, an interesting one. I think I wouldn't say we're like, well, me personally anyway, I wouldn't say I'm like an interloper to the engineering community, but I think I could sit there quite comfortably in terms of understanding the domain and what they're doing. But no, like, jokes aside, like, I think that's one of the areas where our product domains, you have to be strong in really kind of understanding the challenges that those engineers have to face and really working closely with them to kind of get the deliverables that kind of we're looking for. And I think that's a real close proximity for us, whereas like maybe other product leads might have that same proximity with designers and that design community. I think it's different for us. I don't know whether you'd agree.
Yeah, I think it is a little bit different. I think you can't help but kind of absorb some of it. It's we're the team that I work on, quite a close-knit team. Loads of different engineering skills within that team, and when you're in that environment day in, day out, it's hard not to pick things up as you go. I think it'd be nice to think that your engineering colleagues kind of trust you to act as a proxy for them. If you're in a setting where something's being discussed and maybe engineering isn't involved in that particular session, that they trust that you're thinking about the potential implications for them and what they might need to do. And I think that's where we can kind of build that type of relationship with the engineering communities, that we're not signing them up for something which is going to ruin their lives for the next 9 months.
What he said.
So I think that that there's and it's nice to feel that you've got that kind of trust, and that works both ways as well. So that when we're coming to them with a problem, that they're approaching it in the way where we're in this together type thing. It's like and the feedback that I get is that's really appreciated. I think it just garners like greater ownership across the team. Yeah, it's like it's not the product lead's product; it's the team's product that we're all responsible for. So I think there are definitely benefits to the relationship that you build up with your folks in engineering. And
I mean, Del, we were talking about like the end user is developers when they're integrating with the external API. So do you feel that having a tight bond with engineering means that when you are liaising with other engineering teams, that it comes a little bit more natural rather than feeling forced?
Totally, because I think in almost working closely with the engineers of building our own external APIs, you are almost empathizing with the engineer on the other side of the screen that's going to have to interact with your API, and making sure whatever we're building makes that job as easy as possible. And that's a constant bit of feedback or a feedback loop that we have, because like I said before, there's always room to improve, but that's an area of improvement of how do we make it easier, simpler, quicker, to kind of intuitively know what to do with our services without having a laborious process of I've got to talk to loads and loads and loads of people to kind of get anything done. I'm not saying we're there yet, but I think that natural empathy for what both our internal teams have got to be able to build, I think to Pete's point, like you said it perfectly, of almost that appreciation of the challenges they've got to face, and almost baking that into your thinking of how you want to approach or think about approaching solving a problem. That really cascades into the way we present and design our APIs. Because I know we've definitely had feedback that we've got some really kind of well-structured, well-designed, intuitively simple and coherent services, and that's a great bit of feedback, and I think it's a great kind of compliment to our engineering team, and also like across the business, in terms of we've got to have built like really high-quality services internally if we're going to produce high-quality services externally. So I think, it's just a natural positive kudos to everybody.
Was there like an aha moment on stuff like this? Because again, I'm going back to did some stuff years ago with the NHS, and it wasn't until I actually went and sat down with the people developing the NHS systems, then you go, I can see why you're struggling now, like, because you went and put yourself in their shoes, and it's like, I get it, that is tough, it's not explained properly. Have either of you had an aha moment where you've gone, oh, right, that now makes sense, especially around when you've pivoted into this area? Or is it was always there, I knew from the beginning?
So I think a good example, I wouldn't say, I think maybe the one advantage that we have is that because we haven't pivoted, it's not like a one or the other situation. We haven't just gone, right, okay, it's all API, so we're not going to do software. We still very much do our own software products. So we get to do a lot of discovery through that process and learn a lot, which allows us to give that guidance to external people. So I think that's a nice balance. So it's less of maybe the example that you gave there. But one thing that I learned was when I first made this pivot, and we had like this objective to make one of the products that I was responsible for, we want to create an API version of it. And I think back to that, what that API looked like, and we would never build that today. It was cringeworthy. It was like, we basically designed the API almost as like a replica of the software that we'd built, because we weren't thinking of it, or certainly I wasn't thinking of it from the mindset of it's about enabling the capability and not just like being overly prescriptive. So that comes back to that point earlier about control, and I hadn't learned that lesson yet around this. You've got to think slightly differently. and it'll be less kind of restrictive around it. It was a very restrictive kind of design, the way that it's not live anymore, this API.
Well, Dell got rid of it.
Dell built something way better. But that was a really big learning curve, because it worked to a degree because it kind of did what it said on the tin, but that's all it could do.
Yeah.
And I think what we've tried to do now is as I think Dell mentioned before, people are coming up with novel ways to utilize stuff where we're actually thinking, it's not something we'd considered.
Yeah.
So trying to instead of trying to approach it thinking we've got all the answers, it's been that's definitely been a bit of a learning curve, and that was really right at the start of when I very first pivoted into even having to worry about APIs. So that was definitely an aha moment for me.
Right.
I think there's probably a couple of aha moments that I can think about. Like for me personally, and I'd probably consider maybe one for the business. So personally, I'd say that aha moment was right at the early stage in my career, like working closely with kind of external APIs. And I think that scenario was almost, we were early in the days where we built our search service, and we thought, like, this is a novel idea probably for retailers. And in my mind, it probably would stay within that boundary of there'll be certain mid-sized retailers that might kind of run towards this, but maybe the bigger beasts still want to stay with their kind of well-tried and tested SaaS solutions that are risk averse. Let's put it that way. And the aha moment of the power of our services was when we pitched to BMW about shifting from their monolith SaaS platform, where they always complained that the data in it was wrong, the process of getting it changed was like tedious, and they had no control in their consumer experience, because it was a SaaS platform that was almost signed off from Munich, that the whole EMEA region was using this provider. So they wanted to pivot, and the UK's national sales company wanted to pivot and have more control, have better quality data that they could have a hand in. And we just suggested a novel solution about, well, why not integrate your core factory build data into our platform? We can expose in our search service, and you can use your design agency that does lots of other creative, wonderful things for you to build you a user experience. And they did it. And that was like, oh, I was not expecting that to happen. Yeah. I was not expecting somebody of that size to take the risk. And they built something pretty good. And then that just kind of built that domino effect of more and more people think, oh, okay, actually, this is a viable thing we can do. And again, that was like probably like 5, 6, maybe even 7 years ago. And I think that was like an aha moment, that there is legs in this. That was like the thing for me. And I think the other, probably more recent aha moment, maybe for the broader business, was the importance of kind of real-time connectivity. So thinking about the broader initiative that we've got going on now, the big long-run initiative of how do we support like digital retailing, omni-channel retailing for the industry, knowing the fact that used vehicles, particularly used vehicles, are individual items that when you're trying to almost support some sort of selling online to a degree, you have to really have a strong understanding about the availability of that vehicle. It's much more important than any other kind of e-commerce platform where you have multiples of the same product. And I think as we started to try and experiment with our early propositions there, the real aha moment was the sheer importance of making sure that we had as great a view of real-time availability of retailer inventory, either using our tools or third-party systems or retailer systems integrated into our stock API. And I think that was like a big aha moment. Says like, this is really, really, really fundamental in terms of where we want to kind of go moving forward. So yeah, probably 2 examples.
Cool. Sounds good.
Cool.
And if you're looking at like, so forget AutoTrader for a minute, and you're looking outside at either other platforms or big data providers, anybody that you like admire, might be in a completely different vertical, that you go, oh, they do that really well, and actually I like the way they're presenting their platform solutions. Anyone you look at, or from a data side, that you go, oh, I like a bit of that?
From a platform perspective, I think not like I'm an engineer and have integrated myself with any of these services, but in terms of trying to think about the things that I'm trying to do for our end users, what I can see from these platforms. So the likes of Slack, where I can see they've got a real suite of various different services, but the way they present their documentation, the way they provide the relevant resources and guides to help people kind of envisage this is what I can do with these resources, the way you can go and test and play around with their services, even without like for a novice like me, because I'm not an engineer, you can almost get a feel for, if that wasn't clear.
So Dale's just saying he's definitely not an engineer.
You can get a feel for what they do. So I think that really is good. And I've definitely heard lots of good things about the likes of Stripe and Twilio have got kind of really powerful APIs, as well as great experiences for developers. So I think that's always that like acid test of powerful capability, but a real focus on the user experience, but the developer user experience. I think that's the
so those are the kind of places you go for a little bit of inspiration now and again.
Yeah.
What about yourself, Pete? Any places you go and look for inspiration? Apart from manunited.com?
I wouldn't go there for inspiration at the minute. So, yeah, I think... trying to think if there's any specific examples, but there's certain times when you're using... and it can be actually outside of your day job, you know, booking a holiday or whatever it might be. And you know when you're on a platform where it's pulling data from all different places, and it's just really slick. It's really easy. It's really quick. Really, there's no friction there, and that it's when when you're using one of those, you get that feeling of like this is so easy. Like this is a really good example of what they've done. And so it's more looking at stuff like that and thinking about how can we do that for the auto industry. It's like. That's where, as Del says, like as we move towards like things like omni-channel retailing and things like that, that stuff becomes really like super important in terms of the nuts and bolts of how it works behind the scenes. But also, if you can imagine like a car buying experience where it's as slick as that, and it's it's maybe telling you the MOT status of the vehicle, the history of it, so it's a really it's a really good. I mean, all of this data comes from different people. You got the DVLA, the SMMT, all of these different organisations, all the various insurers, finance lenders, all of these different places where all of this information is. And as you as a consumer can go through that experience. And all of that information is there. It's digestible. It's presented in the right way. It's delivered to you at the point that you need it. And we're doing, it's that kind of duck analogy where you as the consumer, you're using it. Auto traders underneath, like paddling away because we're worrying about the complexity for you.
Yeah.
I think that's the type of thing that you look at and you think about. As Del says, the things we're looking about with digital retailing, and you're thinking, there's a real opportunity there to do that kind of Airbnb. There's people who do it super, super well. It's sometimes it can be a little scary as well. Like I don't know if you guys have done this, where you go on a website and then it knows stuff about you. And you're like, how do they know that? It's a little bit scary, but it's really cool as well because it usually saves you a ton of time.
Yeah.
And it usually ends up, you end up with a really good, quick user experience. It's probably talking to Google or something like that, but you go on to something, you're like, it knows loads about, about me.
There's definitely a talk about privacy and stuff like that in the future.
Oh, totally.
It's great, but it's scary.
Yeah, it's great, but it's scary. And it's, it's that type of stuff where you think, whoever's done this has done a really good job on it.
It's when they start telling you your waist size, where you go and buy size 32s. It's like, size 32s, Pete? I'm sure you're size 34. Anyway. Well, thanks for that, gents. That was been a cracking time on the couch.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, no. Thanks for joining, and thanks to listeners tuning in again. Next episode will be coming up soon. Laters.